In the name of the Holy and Undivided Trinity, one God. Amen. Please be seated. Well, I guess I should thank Chrissy Hewitt for her sermon in our class this morning with Dr. Robinson, because it will spell out a theme that continues in Mark that she preached on this morning from the previous chapter, which you are soon to hear about. When I encountered Christianity at the age of 13 and took my first confirmation class in this little Presbyterian mission church in New Mexico, some of you have heard this story, I immediately said, "Can I do that again?" I loved it, but I'm not sure that I got it all that first time. Fast forward many years later, about to graduate seminary, and I still realize I'm not sure I got it all. So although I want to roll my eyes at the obtuseness of these disciples as we encounter them in Mark, I can't. They realized they still weren't sure what Jesus was talking about with his "I'm going to die and in 3 days rise again" message, so they just remained silent and did not ask questions. I get it. Asking questions makes one vulnerable. And Peter had already fumbled responding to this message once before. So they continued on with a dogged determination in Mark of always journeying, always being on the way. And when they got to their house in Capernaum, Jesus asked them a question. "So, what were you all arguing about?" And even though they know the answer to this question, they again are silent. What we have here in the literal year of our Lord is a failure of communication with the Lord's chosen ones. Jesus knows where their journey leads. It was important for the disciples to understand that he was going to be killed, that it would be very difficult and confusing, but that he would overcome this very unovercomable thing, death, and rise again. That true victory over evil came in the form of a paradox. Because if they didn't grasp this, they weren't going to grasp why the very thing they were arguing about on the way, greatness, was a problem. So in the embarrassed silence that followed Jesus' question, "What were you arguing about?" Jesus sat down. We all know what that means. And he called them over. Now, I can imagine this moment being similar to hearing my mother calling me by my first and middle names. Jesus gets serious. And what they talk about is greatness. It's really easy to be exasperated with the disciples, but let's step back and look at this scenario honestly. By following Jesus, weren't they hoping for a better world, or at least a better place in this world? His followers had walked away from their lives for 3 years to get to a point where now the teacher is telling them that he's going to be murdered. That's pretty darn unnerving. And what he even meant by rising up in 3 days is hardly comprehensible, although they could have asked. So it only makes sense that after all that sacrifice of livelihood, the rearranging of community and family, that they were hoping to get something from it. And to be honest, are we also hoping for those same things? We will have spent 3 or 4 years here in seminary, longer, I guess, if you're faculty, separated from our community in former lives, and aren't we expecting something from this? We aren't that different from the disciples, and just like 13-year-old me, I'm leaving seminary in 91 days and 22 hours, and I still don't completely get it. Greatness in Mediterranean society then was acquired by honor, and may I suggest that means privilege. And honor had 3 pillars. The first pillar was wealth. The other 2 were purity and humility. Now, purity as in the distinction between the clean and the unclean, which required a certain level of economic stability and livelihood. Humility was instilled as a value to make sure everyone stayed in their lanes and knew their place. Of course, these values were instilled by those in power in order to keep their power, a status of class imposed on the masses beneath them, a status and privilege that the disciples did not have. One can understand the desire for just a little greatness, but one is lacking in privilege in a society that has been oppressive and often demeaning. But the disciples hadn't quite caught on to the Jesus way yet, and instead of questioning the system or the empire that perpetuated this, they go for the power grab, the lure of greatness. This is the very opposite of what Jesus has been trying to teach them. Yet I think we can cut the disciples a little break here too. Most people who have been denied privileges only want the societal benefits that others have been afforded. Isn't that what we all want? But what Jesus is trying to get them to understand is that by perpetuating the very same standards that award people access to whatever is greatness, they just keep reproducing the same oppressive system, and in turn will subjugate others to the bottom rung of the ladder. Greatness that the disciples were arguing for and that we often try to achieve for ourselves is often built at the expense of other people, breaking the spirits of those of us who desire it and the backs of those upon whom the greatness is built, moving from oppressed to oppressor. So Jesus sits everybody down in that house in Capernaum and says, let's have a talk about greatness. In God's world, in my kingdom, he says, greatness looks like choosing to be last, serving the people no one pays much attention to, that feel they have no value, and certainly those that have no power, like this child. These are my people, he says. Pay attention to them. Reveal to them their value. Show them what to be great is, to serve me and each other, in conjunto. In fact, in doing so, you are serving God. This is acompañamiento, the Jesus way, to accompany each other, to go with each other. We aren't here to do for others. We are here to be with others, to be together, to accompany those that have no power, to be in community with those that are not seen. To be of service really does mean to serve others, but as a choice, not a forced action by those in power. We have to ask ourselves about our own desires as we prepare to be servants of God in God's church. I can hear Jesus asking us, so what do we think about greatness? Those of us with considerable privilege, what do we do with this? Just by the fact that we sit here in an institution of higher learning means we have privilege. And some of us have more than others. We've wanted our own greatness, our own best grades, our amazing OTM profiles, always proving ourselves. The very system we work in promotes this. As followers of Jesus, we will have to wrestle with the system, the empire, and the desire for greatness. But there are lessons here I believe we will take with us and integrate deeply into how we live in the world and serve God and others in the church and in our communities. lessons the disciples eventually got. Our faith leads us to be with those who suffer and have been rejected. And we remember those who have walked with us. We are to be together like that. God empowers us to love each other like that. We aren't doing it for others. We are doing this together, in conjunto, seeking and serving Christ with each other and in those of little value, like a child. As we leave these walls of higher education for another religious institution, we know we don't understand it all. But I hope and pray that we are committed to this Jesus way of being together in service and in accompaniment, and find true greatness in serving and loving. Amen.